The world felt like it was humming, vibrating with a perfect golden frequency that only my wife and I could hear. The last notes of the recessional music were still echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the chapel, but they were already being replaced by the joyous, chaotic sound of our friends and family rising from the pews. I looked at my wife. My wife, the word itself, was a miracle, and her smile was so bright it felt like the sun had decided to move indoors just for us. The ring on my finger felt both impossibly heavy and as light as air. It was a solid, tangible proof that this moment, this feeling was real. I was 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, everything felt completely, unequivocally right. We'd spent more than a year planning this day. Every detail from the color of the napkins to the font on the invitations had been a joint decision, a little brick we laid together to build the foundation of our new life. And standing there, holding her hand as we prepared to walk back down the aisle and into that new life, I could see it all paying off. Her dress was a masterpiece, something she'd fallen in love with at first sight. It was elegant and timeless, and it made her look like she was floating. The light catching in her eyes wasn't just a reflection, it was pure, undiluted happiness. I squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back a silent, perfect communication. We were a unit. We were a team. We were finally, officially, us. The walk back down the aisle was a blur of beaming faces, happy tears, and outstretched hands. It was a wave of love and support, and we rode it all the way out into the sunlit courtyard where the receiving line was set to begin. This was the part I was looking forward to, the chance to thank everyone personally, to share a hug to accept their well wishes, not just as Landon Peterson, but as one half of a whole. The air was crisp, the sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and the atmosphere was electric. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could possibly ruin this day. The first dozen or so guests were a warm whirlwind of congratulations. Aunts and uncles, old college friends, my boss, clapping me on the shoulder with a genuine grin. It was exactly as we'd pictured it. My wife, normally a bit more reserved, was radiant, laughing and hugging everyone with an open-hearted joy that made me fall in love with her all over again, right there in front of everybody. I was just turning from shaking my cousin's hand when I saw her, my new sister-in-law, Aria Cook, and the perfect golden frequency of our day faltered. It didn't stop, but it hit a sour, dissonant note that made the hairs on my arms stand up. For a split second, my brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing. It was like looking at a photograph with something deeply wrong in it, something that didn't belong. Aria was standing 2 people back in the line, but you couldn't miss her. You were meant not to miss her. She was wearing a gown, and it was white. It wasn't just a white sundress. It wasn't off-white or cream or ivory or champagne. It was brilliant, stark, unapologetic white. And it wasn't a simple dress either. It was a floor-length, form-fitting silk number with delicate straps and an elegant flowing cut that would have been perfectly appropriate for a bride. It was a statement. It was a costume. And she was wearing it to her own sister's wedding. My eyes shot from Aria to my wife. My bride, my beautiful, happy bride, was still smiling as she spoke to the guest in front of her, but I knew her face better than I knew my own. I saw it. It was a flicker, a microsecond of a change that no one else in the world would have noticed. Her smile, which had been so genuine and effortless all day, suddenly became a performance. The corners of her mouth stayed up, but the light in her eyes dimmed, and a tiny, almost invisible muscle in her jaw tightened. It was the smile she used when a coworker was condescending, or when a stranger on the street told her she should smile more. It was a shield, and seeing her have to put that shield up on her own wedding day because of her own sister sent a hot spike of anger straight through my chest. When it was Aria's turn, she glided forward, her white dress whispering against the stone of the courtyard. She hugged my wife first, a theatrical air kiss embrace. "You look so beautiful, sis," she cooed, her voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm so happy for you." The words were perfect, but the delivery was poison. It was a performance designed to make her look like the perfect supportive sister, all while wearing a dress that screamed, "Look at me, look at me." Then she turned to me. She gave me a hug that lingered just a little too long. "Welcome to the family, Landon," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "You better take good care of her." There was no warmth in it. It felt less like a welcome and more like a warning or a challenge. I just nodded my own smile, now feeling as fake and brittle as my wife's. I couldn't form a single word. All I could see was that dress, a brilliant white beacon of passive aggression, deliberately trying to steal the spotlight from the one person who deserved it most. The reception was being held in a beautifully restored barn, strung with thousands of fairy lights, that made the whole place feel like a captured constellation. The atmosphere was supposed to be magical, and for everyone else, I think it was. The band was playing, champagne was flowing, and the air was filled with laughter. We made our grand entrance to a roar of applause, and for a few minutes as I held my wife for our first dance, I managed to push Aria and her white dress out of my mind. It was just us again, swaying to the music, lost in our own little world. My wife rested her head on my shoulder, and I could feel some of the tension leave her body. I whispered to her that I loved her, that she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and that this was the best day of my life. And for those 3 minutes and 45 seconds, it was true. But the real world and my sister-in-law came crashing back in soon enough. As we took our seats at the head table, I scanned the room, and my eyes immediately found her. Of course they did. How could they not? Aria had strategically positioned herself at a table directly next to the dance floor, giving her a prime central view of everything and ensuring she was in the background of every major photo. She wasn't just a guest. She was a presence, an unavoidable luminous white blot on the otherwise perfect canvas of our celebration. Throughout the dinner service and the toasts, she was a master of subtle sabotage. When my best man was giving his heartfelt, funny speech, Aria was laughing just a little too loudly at the punchlines, drawing eyes to her. When my wife's father was giving his toast, his voice thick with emotion, I saw Aria dab at a perfectly dry eye, a pantomime of feeling that was all for show. She moved around the room with a restless energy, inserting herself into conversations, posing for pictures with guests she barely knew. She was always angled towards the nearest camera, her white dress catching the light, a constant silent interruption. She was like a ghost at the feast, reminding us that even on this perfect day, we couldn't escape her particular brand of drama. I watched my wife watch her. The shield was firmly in place now. She was going through the motions, laughing, talking, thanking guests, but I could feel the energy draining out of her. Her sister at 29 years old was still competing with her, still trying to upstage her, even on the one day that was supposed to be entirely hers. And with every conspicuous laugh and every carefully posed photo, my protective anger began to cool and harden into something else. It was no longer a hot spike. It was becoming a cold, sharp, and very clear sense of purpose. This was my wife. This was our day. And I was not going to let anyone, not even her own sister, ruin it. The proof I needed, the final confirmation that this wasn't just in my head, came about 20 minutes later. I was making my way back from the bar with fresh drinks for my wife and me, navigating the crowded tables, when I passed a small group of my wife's cousins. They were huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones, and I only caught a snippet of their conversation as I walked by. But it was enough. One of them, a woman named Chloe, shook her head in disbelief and muttered, "I just don't understand. Of all the colors in the world, why would you do that to your own sister?" Another one replied, "Are you kidding, Aria? It's a power move. It's always a power move." My hand tightened on the glasses. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just my wife. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew exactly what she was doing. The transgression wasn't subtle at all. It was a blaring siren, and I was just now starting to hear all the other people covering their ears. A wave of secondhand embarrassment washed over me, a hot, prickly feeling for my wife. This was supposed to be her day to shine, and instead her sister had made her the subject of pitying whispers. I saw another cluster of guests near the gift table glance over at Aria, who was holding court by the dance floor, and then quickly look away, sharing a knowing look. The air was thick with it. The gossip was the unofficial wedding favor that Aria was handing out to every single guest. I finally made it back to the head table and handed my wife her champagne. She gave me a tired but grateful smile. "Thanks, honey," she said, taking a small sip. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice low. She just nodded, not meeting my eyes, instead watching as her bridesmaids started to get a little wild on the dance floor. "Yeah," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Everything's perfect." It was the kind of perfect you say when you're trying to convince yourself more than anyone else. It was the kind of perfect you say when you feel the walls closing in and you're trying to pretend you can still breathe. And then came the moment, the trigger, the point of no return. The wedding photographer, a cheerful, energetic guy we had hired, clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, folks, can I get the bride's immediate family for a photo over by the fireplace? Mom, dad, siblings, let's do this." My wife pasted on her best smile and stood up. Her parents were already there, beaming with pride. I watched as she went to stand between them, a perfect picture of a happy family. And then, like a magnet drawn to the spotlight, Aria glided over. She didn't stand next to her parents. No, she slid right in on the other side of my wife, pressing her shoulder right up against hers. The photographer, oblivious to the undercurrent of sibling warfare, framed the shot. There they were. My 31-year-old wife, radiant in her actual wedding dress, the culmination of a year of planning and a lifetime of dreams. And right beside her, her 29-year-old sister, a mirror image in a sleek, white silk gown. Two women in white flanking their parents. To an outsider, you wouldn't know who the bride was. And that was exactly the point. The photographer raised his camera. "Okay, beautiful, wow, look at you two," he said, gesturing to my wife and Aria. "It's like we've got two brides here tonight. Big smiles, everyone." And that was it. That was the line. The innocent off-the-cuff comment that landed like a physical blow. I saw it. I saw the flicker in my wife's eyes. Her smile, which had been so carefully constructed, didn't fall, it shattered. It was there one moment and gone the next, replaced by a look of such profound hurt, such deep, soul-crushing disappointment, that it felt like a punch to my own gut. Her shoulders slumped just for a second. The light in her eyes just went out. It was the look of a person who had been bracing for a hit all night, and when it finally came, it was somehow worse than she had ever imagined. She blinked rapidly, trying to fight back the tears I knew were welling up. The camera flashed, capturing that fragile, broken moment forever. And then, before the photographer could even ask for another shot, she did something that broke my heart. She turned away. She just pivoted her back to the camera and took a shaky step away from her family, pretending to adjust the train of her dress. But I knew she was hiding her face. I knew she was trying to compose herself, to swallow the lump in her throat, to stop the tears from ruining her makeup. She was trying to salvage the last shreds of her dignity on a day that her own sister had tried so hard to steal from her. In that instant, watching my wife, my strong, brilliant, beautiful wife, have to turn away and hide her pain, every ounce of passive anger in my body evaporated. It was replaced by a pure, cold, unadulterated rage. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a fashion faux pas. This was a deliberate, calculated, and malicious act. Aria had worn that dress for one reason, and one reason only, to inflict this exact wound. She wanted to hijack this moment to plant a seed of doubt and insecurity to make my wife feel like a co-star at her own wedding. Aria wasn't just trying to upstage her sister. She was trying to break her spirit. And I realized with a clarity that was almost terrifying that this was my new reality. I was a husband now. My primary directive, my most sacred duty, was to protect this woman, to be her shield. For months, I had listened to stories about Aria, the borrowed prom dress that got mysteriously ruined, the accidental secret she spilled at a family dinner, the constant draining need for attention. I'd always seen it as my wife's burden to bear a toxic family dynamic that I could only offer support for from the sidelines, but not anymore. We were a unit now. An attack on her was an attack on me, an attack on us. The vows we had spoken just a few hours earlier weren't just pretty words. They were a contract, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, and in the face of a narcissistic sister-in-law in a white dress. My wife eventually turned back around her face a carefully blank mask and finished the photos, but I couldn't look away from Aria. She was smiling, a triumphant, smug little curl of her lips, as if she had just won some unspoken contest. She had seen her sister's pain, and she was basking in it. She had fired her shot, landed it perfectly, and was now admiring her handiwork. That was when the decision solidified in my mind. It wasn't a thought anymore. It was an imperative, a biological need. I was not going to let her win. I was not going to let my wife spend the rest of her wedding reception walking on eggshells, fighting back tears, while her sister paraded around in her victory gown. The party wasn't over. The night was still young, and if Aria thought her move was the final one on the board, she was sorely mistaken. It was my turn to play. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to confront her and give her the satisfaction of a public argument. My response would be like hers, calculated, deliberate, and deniable. It would look like an accident. It would be an unfortunate, unforeseeable tragedy. But she would know. And my wife would know. And that's all that mattered. My gaze shifted from Aria's triumphant face and began to scan the room no longer as a groom enjoying his party, but as a general surveying a battlefield. I wasn't looking at the laughing guests or the dancing couples anymore. I was looking for an opportunity, for a weapon. My eyes swept past the DJ booth over the cake table across the bustling dance floor, and then they landed on the service station near the kitchen doors. I saw the waitstaff moving in and out, a flurry of black and white uniforms carrying trays of food and drinks. And among them, I saw him, a young caterer, maybe early 20s, moving with a quick, efficient energy, but with a look in his eyes that told me he was sharp observant and probably not paid enough to deal with all of this. He looked like a man who would appreciate a little chaos, especially if it came with a generous financial incentive. My plan began to form clear and simple. The weapon wouldn't be a word. It would be a tray. And the ammunition would be red wine, a whole lot of it. My plan was set. My target was acquired. Now it was all about execution. I couldn't just walk over and start a negotiation in the middle of the reception floor. I needed an excuse, a plausible reason to be near the kitchen doors. I waited, watching the caterer make another round. He was efficient, clearing plates from a table near the back of the room. This was my chance. I turned to my wife, who was now engaged in a polite but strained conversation with an elderly aunt. I leaned in and whispered, "I'm just going to grab us some water, be right back." She gave me a small, distracted nod, her eyes still holding a shadow of the hurt from earlier. That shadow was all the motivation I needed. I made my way toward the back, keeping a casual pace. I nodded at guests, smiled, accepted a few more congratulations. To anyone watching, I was just the happy groom, mingling and making sure everything was running smoothly. But inside, my heart was pounding a steady, determined rhythm. I reached the service station just as the young caterer was dropping off a load of dirty dishes. He turned ready to head back out, and I stepped into his path. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low and friendly. He stopped, a little surprised to be addressed by the groom. "Yes, sir. Can I get you something?" I glanced around. We were in a small alcove shielded from most eyes by a large potted fern and the corner of the wall. Perfect. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers finding the thick envelope of cash I'd set aside for tipping the vendors. I pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills, folding them neatly in my palm. I looked him straight in the eye. "I have a special request." I said, my voice dropping even lower, "and a thank you bonus for excellent service." His eyes flickered down to the cash in my hand and then back up to my face. His professional mask didn't slip, but I saw a spark of curiosity. He was listening. "You see that woman over there?" I subtly tilted my head towards the head table where Aria was holding court, laughing loudly, her white dress practically glowing under the reception lights. "The one in the white gown." He followed my gaze. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Of course he'd noticed her. Everyone had. He simply nodded. "In about 10 minutes, I continued, I need you to be carrying a full tray of red wine. I need you to walk past her, and I need you to have a terrible, clumsy accident. A complete, unrecoverable, full tray of red wine accident, all over the front of that white dress." The caterer's eyes widened slightly. He didn't speak for a moment, just processed the request. He looked from me to Aria and back to me. I saw the gears turning. He was putting it together. He understood this wasn't random vandalism. This was a surgical strike. I pushed the folded bills into his hand. "This is for your trouble," I said quietly. "There's no way this can come back to you. It's a crowded room, people bump into each other. It's an accident, but it needs to be a very, very convincing accident. Can you do that for me?" He looked at the money, then at me. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He gave me a single sharp nod. "Accidents happen, sir." He said, his voice a perfect blend of professional sympathy. He pocketed the cash with a movement so smooth I barely saw it happen. "I'll see what I can do." He then turned and disappeared back into the kitchen without another word. I took a deep breath and walked back to my wife, a glass of water in each hand. The fuse had been lit. Now all I had to do was wait for the explosion. It felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. I stood by my wife's side making small talk, but my eyes kept darting back towards the kitchen doors. My wife squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" "You seem tense." "Never better," I said, forcing a relaxed smile. "Just taking it all in." And then I saw him. The caterer emerged from the kitchen and my breath caught in my throat. In his hands, he held a large silver tray. On it, at least a dozen glasses of deep ruby red wine filled almost to the brim. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of impending doom. He began his journey across the floor, moving with a practiced, steady gait that was just a little too perfect. He navigated around a group of dancing guests, sidestepped a wandering child. He was a heat-seeking missile, and his target was sitting blissfully unaware, basking in the attention she had stolen. I subtly angled myself and my wife so we had a perfect view. "Look," I said to her. "Aria is telling one of her stories again." My wife glanced over, her expression tightening just a fraction. Aria was gesticulating wildly, her hands flying as she spoke, making the pristine silk of her dress shimmer. She was at the peak of her performance. The caterer approached. He was just a few feet away now. He drew level with her chair, positioning himself perfectly between her and the next table. This was it. I held my breath. Then it happened. In a piece of physical theater that honestly deserved an award, his foot seemed to catch on absolutely nothing. He let out a surprised yelp, his body lurching forward with impossible realism. The silver tray tilted, and for a split-second time, seemed to slow down. I saw the dozen glasses of wine lift off the tray in a beautiful, horrifying ballet. They hung in the air for an instant before gravity took over. An entire tray's worth of dark, staining, unforgiving red wine cascaded directly downwards. The splash was audible over the music. It wasn't just a spill, it was a deluge. A tidal wave of Merlot crashed against the pure white silk of Aria's gown. It hit her from the neckline down to her knees, an instant catastrophic Jackson Pollock, painting in shades of crimson and burgundy. For a moment there was dead silence. The music seemed to fade away. Every eye in the room swiveled to the source of the commotion. Then came the sound. It started as a choked gasp and escalated into a full-blown, ear-splitting shriek of pure fury. "My dress!" The room erupted. Guests gasped. A few people jumped up from their seats. Aria was on her feet, staring down at her ruined gown in horror. The front of it was completely destroyed, a massive, dripping, unholy stain that was already soaking deep into the delicate fibers of the silk. The caterer, for his part, was a portrait of professional panic babbling apologies. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry I tripped. I don't know what happened. Please forgive me, ma'am." It was our cue. I grabbed my wife's hand. "Oh my God," I said, injecting as much shock into my voice as I could muster. "We have to go help." We rushed over, playing the part of the concerned hosts. My wife, bless her heart, immediately understood her role, her face a mask of sympathy. "Aria, are you all right? What happened?" Aria wasn't listening. She was hyperventilating, pointing a trembling, wine-splattered finger at the caterer. "You idiot, look what you did. This is silk, it's ruined. This was an expensive dress." Her voice was shrill, cracking with rage. She had completely lost her composure. The elegant, sophisticated woman from 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a screaming, stained mess. The spotlight she had so desperately craved was now on her, but it was burning her to a crisp. I stepped forward, putting a calming hand on her shoulder, which she immediately shook off. "Aria, it's okay, it was an accident. These things happen." I turned to the distraught-looking caterer. "Don't worry about it, man. It was a simple mistake." Then I turned back to Aria, delivering the final perfect blow. "Don't you worry about a thing, Aria. We will pay for the dry cleaning, whatever it costs." I saw the look in her eyes. She knew. She knew dry cleaning wouldn't fix this. That dress was a total loss, and my calm, reasonable offer to have it cleaned was more insulting than if I had laughed in her face. It was a public declaration that I considered her little power play to be nothing more than a simple laundry problem. The center of attention had shifted all right, but it wasn't about her beauty or her daring fashion choice anymore. It was about her tantrum. It was about her screaming at a minimum wage employee. It was about her making a scene at her own sister's wedding over a piece of clothing. She had wanted everyone to look at her, and she had succeeded. But now they were looking with pity and secondhand embarrassment. She stood there for another minute, fuming as my wife and her mother tried to dab at the stain with napkins, a completely futile effort that only seemed to make it worse. Finally defeated and utterly humiliated, she snarled, "I can't stay here like this. I'm leaving." She stormed off towards the exit, not even saying goodbye, a giant red stain leading the way. As the door slammed shut behind her, a strange thing happened. It was like a cloud had lifted from the room. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief seemed to pass through the guests. The DJ, sensing the shift, put on an upbeat song. People started talking and laughing again. The party, which had been held hostage by her simmering tension, was suddenly free. The joy came rushing back in 10 times stronger than before. Later that night, the formalities were over. The cake was cut, and the DJ called us to the floor for our first dance. He played our song, and I took my wife in my arms. We swayed gently to the music, surrounded by the warm glow of the lights and the smiling faces of our friends and family. She rested her head on my chest for a moment, and then she looked up at me. Her eyes were clear and bright, all the hurt and frustration from earlier completely gone. She had a small, knowing smile on her face. She leaned in, close her lips, brushing against my ear. "An unfortunate accident." "Huh," she whispered, her voice full of love and just a little bit of mischief. I just smiled back at her, pulling her a little tighter. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. In that one look, she told me everything. She knew what I had done, and she was grateful, not for the revenge, but for the protection, for the simple, unspoken act that said, "I see your pain and I will not allow it. I am on your team, always." We had made our vows that afternoon, to love, to honor, to cherish. But in that moment, dancing as husband and wife for the first time, I felt like I had just sealed them for real. I had defended our day, I had protected my wife's happiness, and I had sent a clear, unmistakable message. The days of Aria walking all over her sister were over, because now she wasn't just dealing with her sister, she was dealing with us.